1-1. One, two, one.
Good evening. Good evening. Hello there. Welcome to this month's installment of Cinema Jam's Jam Sessions, co-hosted, I am proud to say, by Film and TV Pro. My name's, okay, sure. How about that? So, my name is Jared Fryer. I'm a writer, director, the founder of Cinema Jam, and your host this evening. And now you know a bit about me. I'd like to know a bit about you guys. So, by way of, that's all right. That was a bad glass. It's safe that you gotten rid of it. I'd like to know, just by way of, say, how about a woo? Give me a woo if you have been to a Cinema Jam event or course before. Woo! All right. And by way of another woo if this is your first Cinema Jam event. Wow, so excited to be here. Notice, people who have been here before, much cooler, calmer, confident. Coming to these events will do that to you, so keep coming back if this is your first time. I'd like to tell you guys who are here for the first time a bit about who we are and what we do. So I started Cinema Jam some years back when I was working as a freelancer, and I imagine most of you in the room are freelancers of some kind in film or TV, and you can probably relate to this kind of this aspect of working in this industry, which is that on one hand, you really kind of come together and form this sort of family almost when you work on a project. You work in crazy hours, often have no social life outside of that project, and you're doing absurd things, often kind of menial labor even, and that brings people together, right? And you sort of form this kind of tribe. And it's great. I think it's a really rewarding part that's sort of often sort of overlooked about working in this business. On the flip side, when a project finishes, you go your separate ways. And of course, sure, you'll work with those people again sometimes, but that kind of sense of community sort of disappears, and you're also unemployed until the next project. So I found that, I love that first part, but of course I didn't like how, that sort of vanishes overnight, that community. So the purpose of Cinema Jam at its heart is to recreate that sense of camaraderie at events where you can come along and meet people you've worked with perhaps before, maybe meet some future collaborators. They're not networking events. It doesn't mean you can't bring business cards. You're welcome to. You can even hand them out. It's not the purpose of the event. What we do is networking. It's laughable, I know. We provide a space for you to mingle and relax in a non-networking environment, and we also showcase some of the best new film talent out there with these short film programs we do. And we also invite top people in the industry who've done incredible work to come and share their wisdom and some of their war stories with us and teach us maybe something new about the industry. So we do these events, these jam sessions. They're members-only events once a month. We also run what are called bite-sized courses in partnership with short courses at NFTS. I'll tell you a bit about how those work later, but for now, just briefly, these are weekend professional development courses for people who are already in the industry and who want to upgrade their skills in whatever area they're in. And similarly, as with the guest speakers we bring here, the guest speakers we have at the jam sessions, these bite-sized courses, we again look for the top people in that particular field, Oscar and BAFTA winners and people of that caliber. But I'll tell you a bit more about that later in the evening. The one last thing I want to tell you about Cinema Jam and what we do is we have a really big online presence, and I really encourage you guys to check that out. We're very, very active on social media, Facebook, Twitter. You know what social media is. I'm not going to list the social media accounts we have. Check us out. We post a lot of really great stuff on there, industry news, articles. Perhaps most importantly, we really strive to promote the work of our members. So if you're a member of Cinema Jam, let us know if you're doing something exciting, you want us to spread the word. We would love to. We're happy to do that. We even have a special hashtag for when we promote the work of our members. It's #JammersJammin'. I actually thought of that myself. I didn't hire a consultant or anything. I hired a consultant. He told me not to do that, but I did it anyway. So let us know if you want us to promote you on social media. On a similar vein, we have an online magazine called The Spread, which we have industry news, interviews with people in the business, but also, again, we use it to promote the work of our members. So let us know. And in fact, if you can write and you're working in the industry and you want to write for The Spread, let us know as well. It's a very low commitment. Maybe there's just a particular topic or an event you want to get free press tickets to, for example. Let us know. It's a great way to get to get you're actually in press. Sorry, I shouldn't say that in front of you. It's a great way to get access to people and to events that you might not otherwise get to go to. And it's also a great way to get your name out there. The best case I always point to in this is one of our members who's already a very accomplished DOP in her own right, also is a great writer, and she wrote an article for us last year, I believe, and it was shared something like 700 times on social media, exposing her to a whole new audience and people maybe who would potentially hire her. So do get in touch with me or one of the team, or drop us an email if that's something you're interested in doing. That's enough about Cinema Jam for now. I want to take this time now to invite you to turn off your phones, please. In fact, my phone's still on, so I'm going to do the same. No, it was already off. Okay. So we have a really incredible evening planned for you tonight. We've got some fantastic short films. We also have two really, really excellent guest speakers. We've got the highly acclaimed art director, Francesca Maxwell, and of course, the veteran producer, Stephen Woolley. And yeah, okay. Is there a little round of applause starting there? Yeah, okay. Before we get to the program, though, I want to invite up on stage our co-hosts from Film and TV Pro. If you don't know them, you should check them out. I won't do a whole pitch, but just they are the #1 website for film and TV professionals in the UK for jobs and networking. So with that, please put your hands together and welcome Abigail Longstaff from Film and TV Pro, everybody.
It's not a host, it's just me.
Do you want to have a seat, or
Okay.
it's up to you?
I'm sure, can you just put, I liked the woo-woo thing, but can you just put hands up if you know who Film and TV Pro are and you're already a member? Okay, and you can woo as well if you like. And put your hands up if you're not a Film and TV Pro member and don't know us at all. Cool. So you guys come and see me afterwards, because we've got a free offer for you, so you can get on the site and start using us. So for people who don't know, we're a job site. So if you're looking for any work in film and TV, that's where you can go to find us. Now, I have got some quite exciting news, and you are actually the first people to be told this. This is the first time we've released it at all. I still can't give you all of the information, but I can tell you that Film and TV Pro is going to be no more.
Whoa.
I know, it's sad. But it's not vanishing. We're basically renaming it and rebranding it and relaunching it in July. Now, the reason behind this, and I can't tell you what it's been called, I'm afraid, but the reason behind it is that some of you probably know we have a host of sister sites, Casting Call Pro being one of the biggest. So hands up if you're on Casting Call Pro. Yeah, some actors. And we also have a site for extras, singers, dancers, kids, musicians, voiceovers, everything. And it's just gotten so big now that it's become confusing and people are missing out on using some of our different services. So what we're doing is we're bringing those all together into one kind of super site and giving it one name. If you're with your free membership, or if you're on Film and TV Pro already, you will still be able to use it in exactly the same way as normal, and we will be kind of updating you on what's happening. This is just the first step in a sequence of changes that are going to happen this year, with the idea to us moving towards being a global company that's going to bring together the film companies across the world, actors across the world, and allow you to work, employ, find actors, find extras, find cameramen in different parts of the world easily and quickly. So throughout the year, we'll have more and more changes that are gonna facilitate doing that.
And all announced at Jam Sessions, perhaps.
Yeah, so especially for you. So that's completely new news. You're the first people to hear that. It's quite exciting. And you can guess the name if you like, but I'm not allowed to.
Can you tell us what it rhymes with?
It doesn't rhyme with pro. We're losing
Got it.
that.
I think
so
I got it.
yeah,
Okay.
nothing to do with pro.
So I want to just emphasize, because we had some very exciting news, but we brushed over something that I want to make sure that everyone got, which is
Yep.
we have a really, really great offer that Film and TV Pro is offering members of Cinema Jam, like an unbelievable offer. We've sent you information by email. Please check your email. It's really, really good. And if you can't find it, let us know and we'll give you the details.
Yeah, just honestly, I've got a ton of flyers with all the information on. You just have to email in with a certain code. So just come and find me afterwards. I'll stand somewhere central under a light or something. And yeah, just come and grab me and we'll sort that out for you.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very
Round of applause for
welcome.
Abigail Longstaff, everybody. So it's now time to bring up our first guest speaker on stage. I'd like you to please give a very, very big round of applause for Francesca Maxwell, art director.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for joining us. It's an honor. I did not give people your CV before I brought you up. I think it's much more interesting. I'd love to hear you tell us a bit about your background, what you do, and what you've done.
Thank you, yes. So my name is Francesca Maxwell, Francesca Berlingieri Maxwell, and I'm Italian. I studied fine art in Italy and then in traditional Chinese painting in China. And I was working in restoration and had other experience in Italy. Since I moved to England 27 years ago, I started working in theater as a scenic painter. I just needed to earn some money, you know the score, of course, and so we had to live just as a painter. So from working in theater, I was lucky enough to work in, great theaters, great directors, great stories. And I also not just work with painting, but I was making props and costumes and other things. From that, I then moved to Bristol 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And just as Aardman was setting up to make Chicken Run, and they were looking for a painter to paint the skies. So I applied for the job, and I got a job. And from there, it was brilliant because it was a small, you probably are very, stop motion animation is a very different media than normal filmmaking. So it's a bit of a different, actually closer to theater, I would say, than it is to filmmaking proper. But for me, it was a brilliant experience because I was making sets that were just like theater sets, but smaller, so smaller scale, so easier to do. And
you have a background. You did theater as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
as I say, scenic painters and
Right.
all sorts of things. So when I started working on Chicken Run, it was a small company. Aardman at the time, just changed now, but at the time they were using external companies, outside companies, to make all their sets and their props. And they are only in-house, they're making puppets, and the props, they are held by the puppets, so they are animated props. So we were an outside company making all the sets for Chicken Run. And so it was a small group of people, so we had to do everything, carpentry and soft props and paintings and organizing ourselves and drawings and all sorts of things. So it was really, really exciting and stressful. So I was able to learn the process of the stop motion animation filmmaking from the beginning to the very end of it through that. And then I moved to London and working in big studios from Corpse Bride, Fantastic Mr. Fox, and then I went to Portland to work on Paranorman. From painter, model maker, I moved on to be an art director. And as an art director, I found invaluable my experience in the workshop and because my people are the workshop. I will be nothing as an art director if my workshop wasn't, and all my people making the sets weren't with me and part of, we weren't part of a team working together. So as an art director, you have an overview of the work, and I would say just briefly that we are taking an image, a concept from the designer, and we are making it into a real world, a reality, a three-dimensional things. It can be a small scale or it can be a full scale. You will see a short film later on, I think, by Terry, and which was built with a real full-scale set.
I forgot to mention earlier, if you haven't been to one of our events before, the way we do these discussions, it's not like a traditional Q&A where we talk and then it's your turn. If at any time you have a question, please don't be shy, jump right in. We can, and you don't have to wait for a mic to get to you because there's no mic coming to you. Just raise your voice and I'll repeat the question so everyone can hear through this microphone. No one yet? Okay, when you're ready. Could you tell us a bit about the way that your background in theater may have kind of inspired or changed the way that you, or say informed the way that you work?
In film?
Yeah.
I think for me it's been extraordinary because when I started working on Chicken Run, I was working with people who were coming from theater, from film, and later on I did work a lot with people just coming from the film industry without any other experience in other medias. And so their reference was always from films and related to films, and which for me was something, a learning curve. I had to learn what the camera sees and how it sees and how it works. But I was bringing in all new techniques and way of doing things. They were very much a theatrical way of doing things, which applies particularly for animation, applies really well. And
what sorts of things?
So, for example, one of the small things that they used to paint as impressionist, if you know what I mean. It's when you paint for a film industry, you have to be very use thick layers of paint. And for Aardman, for example, they used their special look was very much of using thick colors next to each other and in block areas. So the house will be just a brick house, will be just painted a coat of brick color, and that's it. The sky will be just a coat of blue with a bit of grad and a little bit of clouds. And I learned in theater to paint, which is actually coming from the fine art tradition of Renaissance painting, with layers of colors and dry brushing. So I will paint not a blue sky starting with a cerulean blue, but I will start with the white and the ultramarine and then the more greenish blue and put layers of paint on. And it's the same when I paint for, any objects in all my sets are full of washes, full of texture, full of heavy on these kind of techniques that have always been more theatrical than actually film. Like.
Well, what do you think about the VFX, obviously, and CG animation becoming more and more kind of the standard? Or it is the standard, really, I suppose. How do you feel about that?
I think it's great. I think it's when I was lucky enough to work with great VFX supervisors in films, particularly when we started working on Fantastic Mr. Fox. We had a great VFX supervisor, Tim Ledbury, who's still working with Wes Anderson at the moment. And he started working with us from the beginning of the film. So immediately we worked together on how much we built of the set and how much we don't build of the set. And we provided for him all, real bits of sets. Say, I will paint a sky only sort of this size, 5 meters by 2 meters, and then, but it will be a real painted sky, and we'll drop it in. So his VFX is more like a collage of real things, because he understands the texture and the way the light hit the texture and how the colors react under the lighting, proper lighting. It might be different. And of course, they are extremely talented and good, so they can then reproduce what we have done physically into CG and make it look absolutely perfect.
Okay, so you don't feel that your very finely developed craft skill set is threatened. Sorry about that. We've got a wonky stage.
Tricky.
Just to keep the interview interesting. So you don't feel that your particular skill set or your craft is under threat from
Not
CG?
at all. Not at all. We are working together, and we're bringing the best in a way of their tools and their artistry with ours. So
That's good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you any questions? No. There we go. Brave man.
What is it like collaborating with the director to make sure that you achieve their vision? For example, when Fantastic Mr. Fox, Wes Anderson has a distinctive sort of vision. So, is there any? What is it like to collaborate with the director in achieving their vision?
Sorry, the question for you, for those of you in the back, if you didn't hear, was what's it like to collaborate with the director to create a vision? Say, for example, with Wes Anderson on Fantastic Mr. Fox, who is known for having a very specific kind of vision.
First of all, I must say then the directors that work in animations are very, very visual directors. I work with directors in theater who don't want to know anything about painting, sets, costumes, nothing at all. They're just into the story and the scene. But in the directors usually go into stop motion animation and animation in general already have an idea of the look. And for Wes, of course, it was a perfect step into animation, because he is, in the best possible way, a control freak. So we can provide the weather for him. We built everything the way he just wanted the way. And he's very much the designer of his films. And so for us, it was he's also a great artist with integrity. So he really knows what he wants and how he wants it, and he asks you to respect that and to really work with it. So yes, it took us a little while to get into his sort of. The first time we had to build a chair in a porch. It was a very simple chair. It wasn't anything specific, but I've sent him 200 images of chairs before he found the one that he liked. It was very but by the end, of course, 2 years after working with him, I knew already the chair he wanted. I would just send him 5 to make sure that he will, have a choice. But I knew which one he picked. So you just have to really, really get into their heads and respect their way of thinking and the art. And it doesn't come easy, you have to work with it, see the history, the films they've made before, and read the story. And fortunately, with Wes, it was very easy because he's a very approachable person, so we were just exchanging emails all day long, and he was always on the spot answering questions and everything. So but it's a very important relationship. The director always has to be part of it. Even on Paranormal, we had 2 directors. It was a much bigger film. But the directors would come every day in the art department to see how things were going on, because they wanted to have, follow the visual part of the film as much as the story and, the lighting and all the other elements of filmmaking.
No? Could you tell us about the biggest or one of the biggest mistakes you've made in your career and what you might have learned from that? I did warn you about
How
this.
long have we got?
Lay it on us.
I think if I may be very, very honest with you guys tonight, I tend to argue with my producers a lot. I once said to my producer that he wanted me to do something. I tend to be very quick, and I understand about finances. I'm trying to be under budget and within time. That I understand that is a very, very important aspect of it. But, the producer was pushing me to be faster and faster and faster when I needed time to get something right visually. For me, the visual look, the coherence of the aesthetic of the film is very important. I think that is my job as an art director, to keep it all coherent. And he was pushing me in a way that my team wasn't able to be fast enough in this situation. So I had to tell him that the film will never be remembered for being done in 56 weeks, but be remembered for the look of it. So we had sometimes. Was there a bad result from that, or it was fine? No, he was very understanding and respectful. But I'm being considered a troublemaker by producers for sticking with my team. And
well, it sounds like you found a way to balance it, because you seem to be doing fine and still being able to speak your mind. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's there's a lot of people who respect that in the film industry. So absolutely, I think you have to understand the compromise, their point of view, and they are enormous pressures. But
is there a particular way? Perhaps it's just a matter of trying to see their point of view, but a way of being able to speak your mind and stand up for yourself without causing problems, or causing just enough problems, perhaps?
Yeah, no, I think I found it easier to work. It's interesting how I don't want to make any, difficult political situation at the moment, but some countries easier to work about certain things. Some other countries are harder. And when I was working in the States, I found it really hard. The producer was very much expecting me to be a yes man, and I was coming with my European ideas of being argumentative, and so that was the hard things in a way that.
Sorry about that. This is where we transition into a discussion about Trump, isn't it? Nah, let's not go there.
We decided
yeah.
not. But so no, that's.
It's just a matter of trying to see their point of view and making sure they know that you see their point of view.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just communication and talking to people is the best things. If you just go there and say no, I can't do that, it's not going to work. It's not going to cut with anybody or anything anywhere in the world. So you need to you have to be very explain the reason why, from your director, why, particularly say in stop motion animation is a very, very technical filmmaking things. I'm sure that if there are, DOPs here, cinematographers, so they probably have the same problem. If I have to explain to Wes Anderson that I cannot build a specific chair because the puppet cannot physically sit on it, a stop motion animation puppet, if I just say to him, sorry, we cannot do it, he will be furious with me, naturally. But if I explain to him why and how and give him alternative, then that is possible. And it's the same with your producers and, with everything. You need to find a way to explain your point of view, why and how, and find alternative if a solution is not right.
Right. Speaking of good advice, could you tell us about some of the best advice you've ever been given?
I think probably the best advice was from a cine painter in theater who said to me, "It's no point expecting you to do everything perfect, just learn how to mend your mistakes and how you can, find a way out of your mistakes and sort things out." I think that was pretty big. It's impossible not to make mistakes.
Right. So you just going ready to make some mistakes and being ready to fix them.
Find other ways.
Anyone have a burning question? Yes?
I would say burning.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, because you're very successful at what you do, you're at the top of your game. What challenges you you on a personal, professional level?
I think, well, it takes off your life completely. Working in the film industry, you know how it is. It's long hours and a lot of stress, a lot of tension, and very difficult communicating and being with people so closely, so with a group of people in very, very stressful situations. So the worst sometimes of people come out. So those are the challenges, I think, and trying to keep your team together, all focus on the same thing and motivated and inspired over long hours. And stop motion animation goes on for 2 years, 2.5 years, you know.
How do you keep people inspired and motivated over that kind of period of time?
You just have to be yourself passionate. They know if you are lying immediately. It's not point to just pretend.
Right.
You have to yourself to be very passionate at what you're doing and believe in what you're doing completely, and then all the time keep them on the loop why they are doing something, and we are all here to do something together. We are not there's a lot of tendency of keeping the departments separate in the film industry, and we are all, it's a very bitty. We are always just doing our bits, and we don't know the bigger picture. And I think for me has been to put people into the bigger picture has been the greatest sort of way of getting the things going for so long.
Yeah. And we're going to wrap up in a moment here, so now's your chance. Yes.
I was wondering, probably depending on how you look at it, an awkward question, but what if your best and worst filmmaking experiences, and are there any particular reasons why? Like what makes a great production for you, and then what makes it bad?
Not mentioning any names, of course.
I think maybe one of the worst experience for me has been working on a very big film with lots of people. It's so easy to lose track of what you're doing and to lose connection. You know, when you're walking down the corridor in your studio and you don't see any face that you know and you don't know anybody, it starts to be a little bit worrying, I think. It's like, you know, what's going on here? Who's who? What are we doing? So that has been probably one of the hardest challenge for me. But as a art director, proper has been to not being able to choose my team and to have people that were sort of passed on to me because of, you know, other situation, and I arrive at the last minute and things like that, whatever. So to have to work with a group of people who I didn't know where they were coming from, what their skills, what their background, it was as being the hardest thing, to trying to get together a team of people who themselves didn't work well together, that was probably the hardest thing. So you end up having to teach techniques. You know, I work with a team that had never done stop motion animation, most of them, and so you have to start from the very beginning and teach everything. And when you're dealing with more than 100 people in a department and have to do this, you know, that was the hardest thing, I suppose. So it's fantastic at the end, but to start on every film, you have to start with a new crew and start again with a new team of people. That is sometimes the hard things. That's why I totally understand when you have, you know, directors and designers and DOPs that brings their own people and their own team in, because then you have people you can trust. From day one, you can just go. Is a very important, you know, good things to have. So that's the good thing. The hard things is to just work with people you don't know at all. Yeah. Yes, it is quite.
We've got time for one more question for Francesca.
I was wondering, do you have any favorite materials to work with, or unusual materials you've used in your sets?
Yes, that's one of the things I like the best in working in stop motion animation is that I can really, really experiment with all kind of materials. And I can tell you that on Paranorman, for example, we were working at Leica in Portland, Oregon, and so it was a big production, and we had, I don't say that we had a lot of money, but it was a great budget compared with other films we've done. But I was still used to work in my theatrical ways, so I did all the sets, all the trees were made of tissue paper and chicken wire, and all the sets were made of chicken wire, and I was mixing up with this theatrical piece of cloth. They are very strange bits of things. We burned them, we just, also, I don't know if you ever seen Ansel Kiefel's painting and work. He's an German artist that works, and he does also things. So we used all sorts of things, hay and grass and soil and all sorts of things we could find around, and it's a great joy for me to use things like that. And in theater you find old rubber tires chopped to pieces, and you just bring them in the set. And so to explore technique, materials, and see, to actually have the challenge to use materials that are unusual. I don't make a tree out of a tree or out of wood even. I have to always think about a different way, and I like that very much. And so we try everything. Once on the first set we did actually on Fantastic Mr. Fox was the grass outside Fox's and we use a knitting machine. We knitted the grass, so it was all hairy wool knitted. So it was a great experiment. It didn't work, but it was a great experiment. We only made one set, but everything else is made of towelings and made of,
Francesca, unfortunately we have to wrap up there.
Sorry,
It's
yes.
been such a pleasure chatting with
My
you.
pleasure.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Big round of applause for Francesca Maxwell, everybody. Thank you very much. Our next guest speaker is the acclaimed producer, Stephen Woolley. We're really, really excited to bring him up here. So please put your hands together. You can even hoot and holler if you want. Stephen Woolley, everybody. Welcome, Stephen.
Yeah, hi. This is great. What a great audience you have. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Well, I guess you should say thank you. So, Stephen, you've had a really interesting kind of route to in your career. You were a programmer in Islington at the Screen on the Green, is that right? And you were
Yeah, no, I started at the Screen on the Green. It's my
Yeah.
local cinema. It used to be called the Rex when I was a kid, and it showed double bills of films. For whatever reason, I was sort of fascinated with movies from a very young age. And I was at the tail end of that point where cinema was still a sort of social activity. Kind of bingo halls started to take over, but I think there were about 6 or 7 films cinemas I could walk to from my house in Islington. And it was a very cheap way of keeping off the streets. And it was all double bills in the 60s and 70s. So the Rex was it was a flea pit. I remember my mum said I shouldn't go. There was only 6 months to get in for 2 films. And they showed the movies that were sort of the leftover films, the ones that the other cinemas had shown either many years ago or actually didn't even bother to show because they were either so bad or because there wasn't an audience for them. So the Rex cinemas showed things like, Ulysses with Kirk Douglas and The Crimson Pirate with Burt Lancaster. But the fact is that they were in colour, and during the 60s, all television was black and white. So escaping to the movies for 3 hours was something that kind of, I don't know why, but I got hooked on that idea of escape and going to the films. And that cinema became the Screen on the Green. And when it became the Screen on the Green, the whole program changed. And interestingly, they started art house double bills. I think I saw my first Chabrol there and first Truffaut. first Kurosawa. When I was very young, I managed to join the cinema club. I used to go on my own to the cinema. That was the other odd thing. Most people I knew would go in groups or with friends, and I or with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or with a partner. I used to sneak off on my own and go and see films. So the Screen and the Green sort of introduced me to subtitle films, and that was an odd thing because television didn't really show subtitle films. And if they did, most TV screens were quite small, so you couldn't really read the subtitles. And I was never much of a linguist, so discovering Chabrol was incredible. And that cinema became, for me, a kind of touchstone for sort of my career, because that gave me this kind of palette of cinema. They specialized in American films. It was sort of, they retarted it up and repainted and put some new seats in and called it the Screen and the Green. So it wasn't the Rex. So it wasn't full of tramps and didn't smell of urine. And but it still showed really odd films late at night, like Quiet Days and Clichés, alongside the Chabrol films or Kurosawa films. So it really did give me this idea that cinema was a kind of forbidden thing, both as the Rex cinema, showing its old Godzilla films and God knows what, and but then later on as the Screen and the Green. So I kind of got hooked into that idea that cinema was a almost transgressive thing, because it was becoming more and more unfashionable. By the time the 70s arrived, going to the movies was not a fashionable trend. But because I loved the Screen and the Green and I loved everything about it, when I kicked myself out of school, I also went to school at the Angel Islington, and I left when I was 17 and lived in a squat in Highbury. I got this job when I just literally had turned 18 as a cinema usher. And the week I was working there, the Sex Pistols and the Clash and the Buzzcocks played an all-nighter. So you can imagine my entire world went mad. Up until that point, I was a jazz fan and was really I'd gone through a whole thing of Led Zeppelin, and I'd luckily had seen people like Van Morrison and the Allman Brothers and all these rock bands, but slowly got into Charlie Parker and Coltrane and contemporary jazz, Miles Davis. But then I saw the Pistols and the Clash and the Buzzcocks, and everything went, for the summer of 76 was completely insane. So two twin things happened really going to the Screen and the Green. Was I indulged my passion for cinema, and at the same time the punk thing happened, and it happened a big way for me, because it kind of, not only did it was it the funnest thing in the world, seeing the Damned's first gig and the Clash's second gig, and all the X-ray specs, and then television came over, and Patti Smith and Talking Heads and the Ramones. It was an incredible time. I mean, it was just the most incredible time. 76, 77 for music was unparalleled. But it also had, the cinema also, I could see, was a tangible thing, that it wasn't something that was just a distant thing, that it wasn't just this thing on the screen, that in the way that bands were being formed with people that weren't musicians. I mean, the Pistols really could not play their instruments, seriously. Those first few gigs were fantastic. They were just looking incredible. It was a very sort of art thing going on with the Pistols and with the bands around them. Susie Sue performed the Lord's Prayer for half an hour at the 100 Club a week after I saw this incredible all-nighter. But it showed me that at that age, you could grab things, that they were grabbing a notion, like Andy Warhol or like the other art groups before them, of music and what that entailed. So it inspired me as someone who was so passionate about cinema, to think that perhaps that was possible in movies as well, that perhaps this thing, this kind of huge, sprawling monster organism of cinema, which literally could go from the Empire State, the Andy Warhol, 7 hours of the Empire State, to carry on regardless, that this thing that could go from Kurosawa all the way to Bergman via Hammer horror films was something that you could participate in. It wasn't a distant thing, it was a tangible thing. And so the punk thing really, for me, merged into the idea of cinema, that it was that anything was possible. That's what I think people missed out with the punk thing. A lot of people remember it for being quite violent. A lot of people remember it for being very arty. A lot of people remember it for being really rubbish music. and some people remember it for being really great music. But the thing I think it did for many of us, young people that kind of got into it, was it kind of planted this seed that there were possibilities, that we didn't have to take what was laid out in front of us. We could go beyond. So I worked with a guy called Roger Austin at the Screen and the Green who programmed it, and I then worked for a political collective called The Other Cinema. Roger was the guy who introduced me to punk, and he was about as mad as you can possibly get. I think I saw the Pistols 7 times in one 12-month period, which was as much as I think as anybody ever did. I saw their last ever gig in Holland in a place called Groningen. And was never really a participator in that whole punk thing. I always stood at the back. I was always a bit of a chatting to Malcolm and Vivian and kind of watching what was going on. Far too shy and far too... I really couldn't be bothered to pogo. I thought it was a bit old. I was 19. I thought it was a bit old for that whole kind of spitting and pogoing thing. But I thought the whole events were the whole thing was glorious. But Roger was a master at double bills. Programming was his speciality, and he really did program some great double bills at the Screen and the Green, all night, Net Funicello, beach parties. Obviously, the staples like the All Night Marx Brothers, All Night Bogarts. It was. A whole of world cinema was there if you could be bothered to scratch it, and I couldn't believe the luck I had. But the problem with the Screen and the Green was a little narrow, and I could see that it was that I wasn't really going to kind of grow, and there was this opportunity to become part of a political organisation called The Other Cinema, which opened a new cinema in Tottenham Street. And I worked there for 18 months. And we showed feminist movies, third world films, documentaries. Again, a whole new world for me. I didn't really know an awful lot about South American cinema. I didn't know a lot about American independent documentaries like Fred Wiseman. So I got a whole other education. And that cinema sadly closed. It was this great cinema in Tottenham Street, 350 seats, purpose-built. But it didn't have the funding to match their ambition. Their ambition was a bit crazy because they thought they could show art film, not even art films. They were pretty eccentric, avant-garde movies like Laura Mulvey and Peter Wallen, Harlan County, USA, which was a terrific documentary which won an Oscar. Films that were really not going to last very long. They could probably play for a week, were being played for 4 to 6 weeks. So they were often at empty houses. And they had a lot of grants, and they lost money quickly. So that sadly closed. And then I was given an opportunity to join as a manager of something called Scala. And oddly, that also started to lose money. And I managed to, I was obsessed with these 2 cinemas in America. One was the New Art in LA. I'd never been to America. I'd never been anywhere outside of the UK other than France. But there was a cinema called the New Art in Los Angeles, and a cinema called the Roxy in San Francisco, and they had these fantastic programs that you could pin up on the wall, and they showed these weird films. I remember looking at these movies thinking, oh God, what are these titles like Thundercrack and The Devil's Cleavage and Eraserhead and all these movies, these midnight movies they showed, and I was desperate to see them as much as anything else. So I kind of went to our owners at the Scala. They were about to close the cinema down because it was losing money, and said, look, give me an opportunity through someone I befriended, a guy called Joe Boyd, who was a music producer, who had produced everyone from Pink Floyd through to Toots and the Maytals and R.E.M. And Joe accessed a way to Richard Branson and Nick Powell at Virgin and said, look, it's the last throw of the dice. Why don't you let this guy program this kind of mad idea of a cinema? And we showed Eraserhead, and I managed to get prints of some of these unknown films. And the Scala Cinema in Tottenham Street was born, and it was incredibly successful. And I put on music events with the Slits and with all sorts of Aswad, and we did film and music events concurrently. And that's really what the Scala became quite renowned for its diverse programming, as well as Cocteau and Buñuel and Truffaut. We also showed feature-lengths, documentaries, and we mixed the program, so it was never one film for 7 days. The Prince Charles is doing a similar thing now, where they're programming, but the Scala at the time was a mix of of those cinemas I admired so much in America, plus the electric cinema. The electric cinema would never show John Waters films, and we showed Pink Flamingos, but they would never show Pink Flamingos. We're a bit like the National Film Theatre, except we couldn't get the prints, and I hated the NFT because it was like a church. I remember going to see a Buñuel film in the National Film Theatre and laughing, and I was told to shush. And I thought, what? It's Buñuel. Of course you're supposed to laugh. So we wanted cinema to be really open to everyone. So the Scala was kind of a very funky place that had very strong connections with music, but also very strong connections with people that love cinema. And we would give over the cinema to all-day Laurel and Hardy festivals. We took 7 days of The Prisoner, the Patrick McGoohan series, and showed all of them on 35. So programming was in my blood, and we moved the cinema to King's Cross, back to Islington, strangely. And there it became even more culty and more underground. And for many people that I know, despite the fact that I have produced over 60 movies, apparently, 60, 70 films, people remember me more for the Scala. The Scala, so many directors from Christopher Nolan, or looking back to some of the people, James Marsh, actors like Ray Fiennes. Well, if you mention the Scala, you can mention any of the films I produced. Talk about The Crying Game or Interview with the Vampire, or you talk about Backbeat, or you talk about Maiden Dagenham, and they're kind of interested. But then if you say, yeah, and I used to run the Scala Cinema, they suddenly drop their knives and forks and go, what, you ran the Scala? Oh my God, those Kenneth Anger films you showed, or oh my God, I saw a double bill there once and a cat jumped on my lap, and oh, the trains that go underneath, the trains that used to rumble. I remember seeing freaks there and having a heart attack because there was a 310 from Euston was leaving. And so the Scala had so many memories for people. It was an atmospheric cinema that you remembered not just for the films you saw, but the environment that you saw the films in. So in a sense, all these kind of pop-up cinemas and all these things that are going on now, which are fantastic, which I 100% support. But in those days, the Scala was like a permanent pop-up cinema, because the Kung Fu group that would take over for the all-night Kung Fus would just be an outlandish group of crazy people who would dress with headbands and come in and do Kung Fu demonstrations on the stage before the films. And they'd show a Bruce Lee film, and then they'd do a few moves for a Bruce. I mean, it was completely nuts. And things like all like acid movies, and it became a different cinema for each group that came there. So the Laurel and Hardy group, for instance, or the Cowboy Western group would be a totally different group of people to the previous days, Robert Mitchum, Triple Bill. So it really was a packed program of 80 movies. And it was from that came Palace Video, which is a company that I started in 1982 with my then partner, Nick Powell, who had previously been with Richard Branson. And that was supposed to be a little video company. Nobody knew what video was until I bought a film called The Evil Dead, which was so successful that little video company became quite a big video company. And I also released a film called Diva, which was also very, very successful for a subtitle film. And then I started having ideas about how I could, because a lot of the films I bought, I was being gazumped by other companies that thought, oh, that was so successful, whatever they buy next, we should try and get in there quickly. So people started paying silly money. So I was encouraged first by John Borman, because I'd released a film called Angel by Neil Jordan that John had produced, and then by Jeremy Thomas, because I was such a fan of Oshima. I flew all the way to Tokyo to see the first screening of Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence, with Sakamoto and David Bowie that Oshima directed. And whilst I was in Tokyo, Jeremy Thomas had said to me, you know what, you should be a producer. You have such a knowledge, and at the same time, you seem to know how money works. And John Borman had said the same thing to me on Angel, because I managed to take Angel away from Channel 4, because they were going to show it in their first year of broadcasting, and show it in cinemas. And he said, you should be a producer. And it was two separate encouragements. So when Neil Jordan was thinking of making a film outside of Ireland, I said, look, apparently, according to John Borman and Jeremy Thomas, I should be a film producer. And you're a writer-director, and he was staying with me at the time in my flat, and I said, why don't we do something together? So we worked on an idea. Well, he worked on an idea. He showed me this script that he was halfway through writing, which was called The Soldier's Wife. about a soldier on the run that comes to London, meets somebody, meets the wife of the soldier he had been responsible for killing in Ireland, and a relationship began, but he could never finish it. He just said, I've got 2/3 of this, I don't know what's happening, maybe they should go to the Notting Hill Carnival. He wanted it to be about London, and he couldn't quite get that last third, or what made it different. So he then brought me an idea, a short story by Angela Carter, which became The Company of Wolves. And I loved the short story. And at that time, as well as The Evil Dead, I'd bought a film called Nightmare on Elm Street, and of course showed a lot of the Cocteau fantasy movies at the Scala, and it was the horror fantasy area was something I was very interested in. And I could see with Angela's short stories that you could make a fantasy horror film more like, and the idea behind what I thought was inspirational about Company of Wolves was I was trying to make a film like Powell and Pressburger. We based our stage, our set, on Black Narcissus, which was all, actually most of Black Narcissus was shot at Pinewood, and we shot it at Shepperton Studios as a forest, and we changed the seasons. And we also went for broke on the effects. We tried to be truly shocking with the beheadings and the transformations, but keep it as Angela wanted. You know, the story of a young girl who goes from 13, 14 to become a woman, and there's tales, her grandmother tells her. So the ambition of Company of Wolves was to sort of combine all that crazy experience I had, but shoot it in a cinematic way. This was always my thing with cinema. At that time making Company of Wolves, I think there were only, this is back in 1983, I think there were only about 10 or 11 feature films made in the UK. Certainly shot on 35, because of course all films were shot on 35 then. So there was a big weight of expectation on Company of Wolves, and luckily for us, it was quite a commercial success, and that launched my career as a producer, and I'm still trying to work it out if I still want to be a producer after all these years. So that I did used to program cinemas.
That's about all the time we have, Stephen. No.
So yeah, I'll go now. Thank you so much.
I'd love to hear what you think, because this fascinating kind of story of how your career has come to where it is now, it seems so grounded in the particular time that you got started, right? In the era of punk, and that kind of that confluence of those films that you were watching, those double bills. How do you think it is, or what are your thoughts on how it is now for people who are getting started?
Oh God, Jesus. It's very hard. I mean, I in many respects I created my own luck, but I was very lucky because when I started, as you said, there was a kind of a gap, really. Immediately with Company of Wolves, we did a deal with a French company who did very well with Company of Wolves, and we had American companies that wanted to partner with us. We looked outside of the UK for a lot of our finance and for our support, and our films were quite successful internationally. The film I made after Company of Wolves was Absolute Beginners, which was a musical, which got some of the worst reviews in the history of cinema. And then I made Mona Lisa, which was a terrific movie, which Neil Jordan again directed, but he didn't, which was based on a thing I'd seen on TV and experiences. But, you know, we were in a time when there really weren't a lot of films being made. I mean, now there are, because technology allows it, technology has changed a lot of things. Technology has enabled people to make films that looked pretty great, cheaply, because the cameras aren't as expensive, the processing isn't as difficult. You know, you're shooting on digital rather than on 35. Technology has allowed films to be seen at home, because now you have these huge TVs, which flat screens, which are as good as going to the movies. Technology has allowed an awful lot of people to get into the business and produce good, you know, and there are many terrific low-budget films like Lady Macbeth, which is an unbelievable movie for the price it cost. And that, you could never have made that film 30 years ago for the price, not necessarily the ideas. And the other thing that's changed a lot in those 30-odd years is that television has grown up. The dramas you see on TV now, and this is partly to do with American cable growing up, but the dramas you see on television have so much more sophistication. Censorship has changed massively. A lot of the earlier films that I produced, for instance, Scandal, a film I made about the Profumo affair, at the time of trying to make that, it was originally with considering it as a miniseries, but no TV company would touch it. We went from TV, we had no idea that Profumo was still very close to Thatcher, and there was no way that any television company were allowed to make it, but they pretended to us that they, oh yes, this is interesting, oh yes, and we got a bit of money from the BBC and we wrote the first hour and a half, and we were going to do a 5.5 hour thing, but they were never going to make it. Politically, that's changed now. Censorship has changed in every way. So I think it's given people a much broader canvas now. It was much narrower then when I started. But interestingly, although it was narrower, because it was so much more expensive to make films and because the audience for films would have to come to the cinema and they wouldn't be able to see it at home, and not necessarily, and not certainly in the way you wanted to make it. It was also a narrow field. There were fewer people making films. Now there are so many people making films that it's almost impossible to give advice to a young producer or director or writer, because it seems that technology has allowed something to happen. There's also the other thing, which is, as I said earlier, you know, when I used to go to the movies on my own to see a Sam Fuller double bill, or to see a Howard Hawks double bill, or to see a Warhol movie at the Co-op, or Trash and Heat at the ICA, often the audience would be far less than this group. I mean, really, talking like 10 people, you know. Cinema wasn't hip. I mean, far from it. I mean, I used to think I was hip, but I was deluding myself. I mean, really, you know, you didn't go to the cinema. You didn't go to the cinema to impress somebody. I mean, it was like a lonely guy's or a lonely woman's preoccupation. Now cinema is kind of cool. You know, a film like Handmaiden, for instance, which has been so successful, just wouldn't be that successful then. It would show at the NFT, or it'd show at a few cinemas, you know, at Phoenix maybe, or the Paris Pullman, or the Electric. It just, you know, now people have a sense that cinema is something great. There's an ambition to be part of that business. Outside of the UK in the 80s, cinema was hip and cool. You'd have to go to Paris, or you'd have to go to Berlin, or you'd have to go to Los Angeles to be considered to be anyone if you were a film producer. In London, I think the film producer took on the term of quite sort of an insult, really. You weren't film producing, but it still is in some respects, I think, in the UK.
An insult?
I mean, I think it's not an insult, but people just don't know what film producers do. I mean, and quite rightly. I mean, you look at a movie and you see so many producers on the front of the film. You know, you have co-producers, associate producers, you have co-producers, you have co-executive producers, you have, you know, you have a whole raft of producers, and then you see the producers and suddenly you've got 20 names, and you're thinking, how did it take like 60 producers to make a movie and only one director? And I can understand people's confusion, because you know, there is an element of films being different every time, and that role of producer being quite a mixed up role. Way I work with my producing partner Elizabeth is we take stuff from very early on, usually an idea, like Leighton Dagenham came from a radio show I heard. As I said, Mona Lisa came originally from a newspaper article in News of the World, and a documentary I saw about Paul Raymond. I mean, we take things from a book that we've read, or a play. Byzantium came from a play that I saw in Bristol, because I wanted to do another Gothic film after Interview with the Vampire and Company of Wolves. I hadn't done a Gothic film for a long time from a female perspective. So Maura Buffini's play was actually written for children, for 14-year-old, not children, but teenagers. So we generate our own material, and that in itself, in Hollywood, you'd get your producer credit for. But making films independently, you've got to take it to the next stage, which is the financing, and everybody thinks that's boring. Everybody thinks, well, the financing is the boring part. In fact, the financing is often the most exciting, because you've got to ally those original ideas with why did you want to make Made in Dagenham, for instance, or Carol, or more recently Their Finest. Where is the audience for this film? How many? Budgets are often dictated not by the script and what the script demands, but what you think you can raise in the market. Because that's, as a producer, you have to start to quickly assess where am I going to find an audience for this story that I love so much. So those initial moments of development where you're working with maybe 2 or 3 people, maybe you're working with a writer and somebody who's giving you a little bit of money for development, quickly mushrooms once you start to get out there into the financing world, into all sorts of partners, distributors, financiers, TV companies. Suddenly your team is growing. And then, of course, if you're lucky enough to raise the money, having done the budgets and all the casting and everything else, or the balancing act, which is part of the financing, because no one gives you money for a film unless they know who's in it. That's a basic fact. So that casting comes into the very early on the financing, and then you come to the third stage of the shooting of it, which is the bit everyone loves. Because everybody wants to stand on the film set, and everybody wants to get the excitement of the filming. And that's, of course, the most intense part, because that's when you spend the money. That's where the big money is spent. And then you get the post-production, and then you get the release. So there's 5 areas of producing that you have to be pretty well acquainted with if you're actually producing a film. And as somebody who's also directed, it becomes, I'm kind of in love with all 5 of those areas. I don't really distinguish, even the releasing bit, which people don't like, because I go back to my days as an exhibitor and distributor. And I also go back to the very beginning. Why did you do this? And what made you do this? What made you be so stupid as to think that this particular project would work? And you have to kind of trace everything back to the point where you think, well, I persuaded myself then, or we persuaded ourselves then, that it was a good idea for these reasons. And then you have to bring all that 2 years later, or 7 years later, or 13 years later, back to the Limehouse Golem, which is being released in September, which is a film that I produced, which Jane Goldman wrote the screenplay for. The whole journey began 13 years ago when I first inquired about the rights on that book, way back in the 90s. And it was then acquired by Merchant Ivory. I couldn't get the rights. God knows why they bought it. They would never have made it, but they didn't make it. And then Neil Jordan was interested in writing and directing it. He lost interest, but the rights came up. I bought the rights, and Terry Gilliam popped up and said, I hear you bought the rights on Limehouse Golem, can I come and meet you? And I had promised myself very early on that I wouldn't make a film with Terry Gilliam. But I thought, one Terry Gilliam film in a life, let's go for it. So we started developing it with Terry and Tony, his writer, and then it really didn't gel. The script, Terry was off doing lots of other films, and he never, after 3 years of trying to get a script that he liked, that we liked, that we just gave up. So I let it go. And then 3 or 4 years later, Jane Goldman and I had lunch, because I'd just met with her, and I said, are you interested in doing something? Well, I'd love to work with you. And she said, oh, you've got this book called The Limehouse Golem. And I said, well, I don't actually have that book. I lost rights on that ages ago. Let me check. I discovered that the rights had just become free. Another producer had them for 3 years and had done nothing with them. I don't think they had. I never saw a script. So, but I said to Jane, whatever you do, Jane, if Terry Gilliam calls, don't take the call. I knew Julie did call. No, but seriously, it was a case of like, well, she had an idea. She had a great way of taking the script and making it into a movie, because it was a real tough nut to crack. And she had a brilliant idea, which is in the film, of course. But then there was another 3 or 4 years of development with Jane, because we started with Film 4. They changed all their personnel. We started with the BFI. They changed their personnel. The people that came in didn't like the idea very much, or didn't like our script very much, so it got jettisoned out. So then we had to go back to ground zero again and try and raise the financing. So as it goes on, it's not unusual. This is what happened. This is part of what I do for a living, is to completely take rejection after rejection and keep trying to plow ahead. Sometimes you do give up. Sometimes you realize maybe they are right. The worst thing that ever happened to me was making The Crying Game. which we just shot around the corner from here in Spitalfields. The reason that was like winning the pools, because everyone hated the Crying Game. Everybody universally, all the American distributors, all the financiers, I literally had to beg, borrow, and steal to get that film made, and it grossed 80 million in America and had 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. So the problem with me is that was the story of the Crying Game, was hatred. It wasn't even dislike. People threw the script at me. People in calm Americans who usually can say no to you in a way that you never notice, weren't just saying no, they were literally throwing the script across it. You think you can make a film where your main protagonist is a terrorist who falls in love with a black woman, a black and white in America, interracial, and the woman turns out to be a fuck off. They were just angry. And I thought, God, that anger is amazing. It's like, there must be something in this script. So I just made it against every rule possible and forced Channel 4 to make it. They gave money, and it's well documented, the story of the Crying Game, how hard it was to get it made. And of course, it didn't just do well, it did beyond anyone's expectations. I mean, certainly beyond mine. I had no idea it would do that I thought it would do well in America, but I didn't think it would do that well. So the problem with that is when you're a producer or when you're a filmmaker is when you achieve that kind of success, it's very difficult then to take rejection. It's very difficult to be rational about people that say it's rubbish or nobody will go and see this. So you get more fuel for that. It's almost, the negativity sometimes creates more excitement, more adrenaline, because you think, then I must be doing something right. Generally, the way the business is constructed is that there are obviously audiences out there, and we all think our films, our contribution to films, are really crucial and important, and the subject matter of what we're making is really important. But you can't access the audience. You access gatekeepers to the audience, who are sales companies, financiers, and distributors. And distribution is a very tough game. It's really difficult. And distributors generally want to hang on to what they've just been successful with. So if they've just had a film that's done very well with a particular actor or a particular writer or a particular director, they will want to do that again, or a subject matter. So if they've just had a success with Lady Macbeth, they will think, oh God, we need another film like Lady Macbeth. We need that. If that actress is in a film, we have to snap her up. If that writer has written another movie. And so it goes on. So if you don't have those, of course that's very short-sighted, because as we've seen, just because Jude Law is in a movie doesn't make people want to go and see that film, even though he's been successful in Sherlock Holmes. And I could list 1,000 actors. We all know, sensible people know, that an actor doesn't guarantee an audience. It's the chemistry that makes a film. It's the thing that I couldn't put my finger on, or none of us could put our finger on. It isn't an ingredient. Steven Spielberg has made as many turkeys as he's made hits. And a lot of them were a long time ago as well. Everyone talks about Jaws and Close Encounters. But you look at films like 1941 or Always, two of the forgotten Spielbergs. I'm not even talking about the recent Spielbergs like Warhorse. But do you think Steven Spielberg would have a problem today making a movie about this table? No. Because Steven Spielberg made Jaws. Steven Spielberg is Steven Spielberg. So therefore, people have those short memories, and there is a kind of access to financing that every time you want to make an original or unique film, you're with a new director, a new cast, you're back to square one. And that's the thing you also discover very quickly as a producer, is that there is a glass ceiling. When a film is a success, generally it is that you luckily are part of the chemistry. Luckily somehow what you did was right. That script, that cast, that director, that writer, suddenly your team, or the team, and you're one of the team, made it. And all that hard work and all that sweat and all that awful rejection pays off. And you think, oh, great, life will be easy now. And it isn't. Because by nature, I tend to want to make films that are a little bit subversive, a little bit different, a little bit uncomfortable. And so you go back to square one again, because people go, well, this script isn't anything like the last script you had. And you go, no, it's different. It's a different kind of film. Yeah, but what about the director? Well, no, she's a different person this time. Oh, but what about your writer? Because you're right. Well, can't you just do what you just did? But of course, none of us want to do what we just did. We go to Hollywood and make Eddie Murphy movies. We want to do that. You know, you don't want to do what you've just done. You want to make the interesting films. None of us want to sit still. We all want to challenge ourselves. So as a producer, you do tend to go back to the beginning again. And that can be frustrating. I get very excited about cinema. I mean, I spend most of my time when I'm not working going to see movies. I mean, I go to Cannes and actually watch the films. My idea of Nightmare in Cannes is meeting after meeting after meeting, which I sometimes have to do, because sometimes if a film is on the brink of getting financed, I've got to do that. You know, and as I said before, I don't mind it. But the side of the industry that I love most is still that side of being a cinema rusher at the screen and the green and watching films for free at the back and tearing tickets and watching Warren Oates in Dillinger or watching Chabrol films. It's that is the embracing, I think, of the industry, which I think producers need to do. Not necessarily all of the aspects of the industry. They don't have to have seen every bloody movie made, and they don't have to be a financing wizard, and they certainly don't have to be able to stand on set and work out how many shots it might take or how you're going to get out of a hole when you've got 2 hours left and the director needs 17 setups. You don't have to know all those things, and you don't have to know about distribution, and you certainly don't know about post-production and how much a score is going to impact a film or how much a great editor can do to save you from a film or make a good film, great. You don't have to know all of those things, but you have to know some of those things. And to know those things, for me, you have to be film literate. You have to understand what cinema is. You have to make choices. You don't have to agree with Peter Bradshaw. You don't have to disagree with Dave Calhoun. You don't have to think that critics are always right and critics are always wrong. You have to make decisions yourself about the kind of films you like and the kind of cinema that you're drawn to. And the problem for making as a producer as well is cinema is like an aphrodisiac. It's like a drug. It's like a thing you really love. And I can be so pompous and smug about my opinion about other people's films and about cinema. But once you get into that, you've got the finance for your film, you can also be blind. You can be snowblind. Because finally you're making that bloody movie, and finally the finance is there, and finally, and that becomes so important to you. It becomes, I mean, the hell of making Absolute Beginners, and it was bloody hell. I mean, it was an amazing education, but I wouldn't want to wish it upon anyone else. It was a hellish, nightmarish, in fact I wrote an article for Time Out called Absolute Nightmare, The Making of Absolute Beginners, which was the cover story for Time Out. Despite all the hell, you know, when people would come up to me a year or so later and say, wow, congratulations on Mona Lisa. I mean, Bob Hoskins won everything. He won the BAFTA, he won the Cannes Prize, you got nominated for an Oscar, he won the Golden Globe. You must be so thrilled about Mona Lisa. Shame about Absolute Beginners. I would get angry. I go, well, what's wrong with Absolute Beginners? You know, when you have 2 kids and someone says, oh, your kid's not as nice as that kid. You go, well, fuck off. They're both my kids, for God's sake. I put so much into Absolute Beginners that despite the fact that I can quite calmly say it was badly reviewed, and I can tell you now that Philip French called it the worst movie of the 80s. And Philip is a friend of mine. I mean, I knew Philip really well. He was one of those guys who inspired me through his cinema criticism. But then in the 90s, he said the worst film in the 90s was still not as bad as the worst film in the 80s, Absolute Beginners. That's how bad I know it is. And yet I'd still sit here and defend it because I'm blind. You know, that film, there are things in that film which I think are great. I mean, the music, the set design, the lighting, even some of Julian's crazy direction, even, working with Gil Evans. I mean, that was a thrill enough. And the Paul Weller track in the film is amazing. And working with David Bowie. I mean, it was a fantastic ride for me. And I still feel emotionally connected with that. And that's what you do when you make films. You become a little bit blind, and it's kind of that I can't stand out. I can't be objective about making films. I think you have to be, you kind of get in it. And if you can't get into it, if you can't be part of your soul, part of your being, then you kind of wonder why you start the whole thing, because it is painful. And giving advice to somebody now about, coming back to your question, about what do you say to somebody who wants to get into the business? I mean, I honestly am at a loss, because it is really hard at the moment to kind of jump into the business. Things have changed a lot. And so when I jumped into the business, it was a time when I had a distribution company behind me. Because Palace, as I said, was a freaky success. And that was something. I had the experience of running a cinema that was a crazy, fairly hip cinema that we managed to keep open for 10 years, despite the fact that we were closed and banned, and we had the council on our backs, and we had to go to special certificate to show some of the films we showed and all the rest of it. We managed to keep that going and on a level keel. So I came at the business from using both sides of my brain, the creative side and the functioning side. So unless I knew somebody really, really well, I wouldn't know how they operated. I wouldn't know how to say to a producer, you should do this. I'd certainly, don't follow my footsteps, for God's sake. I don't know. We were at a certain time when certain things were in a particular, the universe was in a particular shape, and we jumped into that universe in a way, and we swam it, and we got out, and we did okay. Now, it's such a different shape. I've been lucky the last couple of years. Their Finest, which is a film about the making of cinema, has been quite successful. Carol was very successful, which is the film that I have to give more credit to my producing partner Elizabeth than myself. Maiden Dagenham was pretty successful. So we're on a bit of a run, and we have two films that one that we're shooting at the moment, Colette with Keira Knightley, and on Chesil Beach, which we made with Saoirse Ronan, and as I said, Limehouse Golem, which stars Bill Nighy, is being released on September 1st. So we're kind of like going through a good time. But we had a year or two before then when we were working on those projects, and some of those projects, and developing, when you're actually not making films. The activity rate of film producing is not necessarily in direct correlation with success. Because making films is great, but people really do remember you, or don't remember you, from the last film that was successful at the box office. So, for instance, on Their Finest, which was a fairly big hit in the UK and a fairly big hit in Australia, and has done quite well around Europe, and is being released as we speak now. I'm going to Germany in a couple of weeks for the German release. It did okay in America. I mean, it's up to about 3 or 4 million, and that's pretty cool for a film out of the UK, and we got a pretty good advance. But it's not a hit. It's not 4 Weddings and a Funeral. It isn't, a box office smash. And our expectation, or the bar, every time a British film like King's Speech does so well, the bar goes up. But, we're not going to make King's Speech every time, or A Crying Game, or even A Carol every time out. But we want to make those. The ambition is there. It's that every film is that successful. But you've got to take it on the chin and say, well, look, if I've recouped most of the money of the investors, if it's been successful for the distributors that have pre-bought it, if Film 4, who may have put money into the film, and BBC are happy, and it goes out, Maiden Dagenham got great ratings when it was shown on the BBC, then that's a bloody success. You can't give yourself too high a bar. But in a sense, you've got to give yourself that high bar to get up in the morning and think, okay, the film is going to be that good. And that bar individually, to give advice to somebody, it's impossible to know what the bar is for other producers. It's impossible to know what you consider that bar to be. And the other thing, of course, is as a producer, I kind of always had a golden rule, which is there are two things I don't do. I can get involved in most things, certainly choosing material, certainly working with the director on casting, certainly in post-production, all those areas. And certainly I will be a sounding board on set, but I never ever tell the director where to put the camera. That's absolutely his or her choice. That's why they're a film director. And I never talk to the actors about their roles. It's absolutely the director's domain, because he or she has got to have that rapport with the actors. You can't have a producer coming in saying, hey, your performance was crap yesterday. You know, throw the entire production into turmoil and undermine the director. The director he or she has got to have a rapport on set with their crew, and your role is very much standing back. You've got to be a sounding board. But everything else, other than those two things, basically is up for grabs. So you can be involved in the movie. But some producers tend not to be involved. Some producers will think, okay, well, I've raised the money, I can go on holiday now, because I've got the crew together and there's a great schedule and I've got a great line producer. What can I do? The director does all the work. And some producers will be on set all the time, looking at the monitor, telling the director, ooh, do that again. No, that wasn't good enough. You know, that's how different it is as a producer. So if someone says, can you give me advice? I don't know, and they probably don't quite know either what it is that they want. Are they that kind of producer? Are they the kind of producer that's really smart and clever and runs around and finds cash that no one else can find from small pockets in Luxembourg and can shoot the whole movie in Belgium, but it's actually set on Mars or something? I mean, some producers can do that. They can do that juggling. And then other producers are fantastic on set, and they can really make the crew feel good and get that extra overtime that they need and make them drive through the night to the next location and, you know, run on set with plates of curry, which is what Ishmael Merchant used to always do whenever they were shooting a movie. He thought the solution for everything is I'll buy everybody curry and I'll make it myself. But there's some producers who do that, and then there's other producers who sit in the cutting room and on top of the editor and director and edit the film with them and tell them, like, no, it's too long. No, it's too long. Take 2 seconds out. Take 3 seconds out. No, we can make these shorter. No. You know, there's a kind of all producers have strengths and weaknesses, and it's so because of that problem. This is the most long-winded fucking excuse in the world. It's really hard to answer your question because I don't know what people want. You know, I don't know. I mean, how many of you in this room are budding producers or would like to be producers? There you go. It's 1, 2, 3. So I'm speaking to 4 people. What am I doing up here? It's you know, those 4 people or 6 people are going to have completely different ambitions as to what it is that they want from a film and what their role is. But I would say the one thing I lucked out on, as well as having a distribution company and having the experience of cinemas and having seen lots of films and doing all the things that I did, I lucked out by falling in with Neil Jordan. I didn't realise, and when I made Company of Wolves, despite the fact we shared a flat which almost imploded with our arguing, and the fact that I didn't even know I was directing. I think on that film I was really directing second unit, which I didn't know about, and I was really Neil Jordan's assistant, and I was really the exec producer and the producer, and I was really doing all sorts of things that I didn't, because it was my first movie. I didn't know what I was doing, so I was doing everything just to cover my ass. So, but what I did do is formed a relationship with somebody who was a writer-director, and that's something that was golden, because as a producer, when you're standing on set and you're in a hole, you can only write yourself out. The only way to get out of a hole is to write your way out of it. You can't, you know, if the script is 10 pages long and you've only got a day to shoot it, you can't shoot 10 pages in a day. So what can you do to get out of the hole. And if you were the writer-director as talented as Neil Jordan, you can write your way out. And that's something which I learned very quickly on Absolute Beginners, which, as though it's credited with 5 writers, there were more writers in that film, because they were trying to write them so their way out with a director who wasn't really listening or looking at the script and who only wanted to do one film, which was the film in his head. And I couldn't, that was the story of Absolute Beginners. But when I worked with writer-directors, when I worked with the 12 or so films I worked with Neil Jordan, it was a joy because I was with somebody who I had a rapport with and who could write and direct. That is something which, as a producer, find someone you're going to be partners with and make filmmaking a partnership. It is a kind of hierarchy in a way. I mean, the making of film is kind of hierarchical and it's difficult to make it as a collective. But if you can jump in with somebody that you know and trust and who's talented, who you have to say, I mean, I directed one film and I directed it because, again, it was a long period of development, and the writer said, if you don't direct this, it won't get made, and they were kind of right, because we'd gone through 3 different directors, and I'd done so much work on that project, I'd done so much research work, and hiring private detectives, and finding people the police couldn't find, and going to Sweden, and finding all sorts of characters, and adding more information, and it was a long process, whilst I was making other films, of course. But at a certain point, I thought, you know what, I think I have to direct this because I can't think of anyone else that can do it. But generally, if you think someone can direct something better than you can, then you should let them direct it. And if they are directing it, you have to give them the space to direct. Don't crowd them. Because if you're not directing it, there's nothing worse than a frustrated director. Producers who are frustrated directors who will go on set and try and direct the film are the worst kind of producers. They are the worst. And it's better to admit, okay, I'm producing this, I'm not directing it. And the director, certainly on set, has got to be the voice that we all listen to. And that's a big step to make, which is essentially you take your ego and you make it smaller than everyone else's. Because the whole thing of making films is that art directors, cameramen, directors, of course, actors, all have huge egos. And they have to. I mean, actors, I love actors. I absolutely adore actors. Actors are the people that you pay money to see. When we're all standing, 50, 60 people behind a camera, there's only one person or 1 or 2 people in front of the camera. And they are crucial or important people that, as a producer, part of my life is making them feel good. I want them to feel good. I want them to feel like their work is being appreciated. I mean, as I said, I'd never say to an actor, oh, you were terrible in rushes, but I would say to an actor, you were wonderful. You're doing a great job. I want them to be bolstered and up. And that is an essential part of filmmaking, which is that your team should feel good. Your DP should feel good about the work. Your designer should feel good about the work. And if you don't feel good as a producer, you have to address it. Straight away, you have to say, oh my God, what have we done here? This location is terrible, or this piece of this set isn't working. You have to address it, and the best way to address it is to have people on your side, and not to have them as enemies. So you have to take your ego and put it in a very, very, into a small drawer somewhere, and just try and communicate with everyone on the film and make them feel good all the time. So it's hard. That's one of the hardest things to do, I think, as a producer, because especially if you have taken something kicking and screaming from an idea and you've sat there for 10 years with it and it's been bubbling under with lots of other ideas and suddenly it's there and you're on set and you're looking at the movie thinking, fuck, this isn't how it should look. And you can't stand and storm into the middle of the film and say, everybody stop. No, guys, it shouldn't look like this. It's not, no, sorry, everybody go home. You can't do that. So if you don't get it right up front, when you're working with your director and working with your team and the crew, if you're not simpatico, if they're not simpatico with you and you're not simpatico with them, then the whole thing will turn into a train wreck. As has happened to me. I mean, I've been on films where the director has turned to me. I mean, this was a movie I made a while ago. and in 1988, I think it was. And it was a comedy. I'd said to everybody it was going to be funny, and it's a comedy, and we'd raised the money. It was quite a big budget. It was $10 million, and we're making a film, and we cast it really well with actors that could play comedy really well, and it was a writer who was known for their comedy writing. And the director turned to me in the rushes after 2 weeks, and I said, that was funnier on the page. And he said, "This ain't no goddamn comedy," and then walked out the room, and the blood drained from my body. I thought, he doesn't think it's a fucking comedy. What have we been doing for all these months? Oh my God, and it really did happen to me. The director thought we were making a serious drama, and I thought we were making a comedy. And that's just as bad as it can get. That's the point where you really are the worst producer in the world, and you get one of those Golden Turkey Awards for your film without it even being finished. I mean, weirdly, that film ended up at the Cannes Film Festival and in competition, and was quite successful. But from there on in, I had to have a serious word about, Bill, this is a comedy. We are making a comedy. And eventually, I think he kind of relented and said, well, there's some funny scenes. I'm like, no, please. I've got Harvey Weinstein. I've got I've got everybody thinking it's going to be funny. And I've got Danny Glover. I've got Forrest Whitaker. I've got Gregory Hines. They all think it's a comedy. Please help me out, Bill, please. And so you've got to get that relationship going on a movie early on. And that's one huge word of advice for producers is, cast your film from day one with your director and obviously your writer from day one, and be on a team, be part of the team. The beginning of a film is teamwork. It's all about teamwork. It's all about how you make your team, and that's a bit like, I suppose, being at school when you see somebody in my day in the playground who's got a copy of a record you like, and you think, oh, he likes Robert Johnson. Oh, he likes the blues, that guy. Oh, let's go and talk to him. Oh, he's got that album. Or, oh, she's got that book. Oh, God, I didn't realise that somebody else has read Catch-22. Oh, I must go and talk to her about that later. You start to gravitate to people who share a common interest. And it's the same on films. You want to share with everybody the movie. You want people to really like the script that you've got. And not just like it because it's a job. Like it because they feel some of the passion you felt when you started the process. So the team, it's always the same. You can't make a film on your own. A director can't make a film on their own. A writer can't make a film on their own. A producer can't make a film on their own. And nor can any of the other crew, the other 20, 30, 40, 80 people. It all starts with, are we on the same team? And then the team gets bigger exponentially as you go along. And as long as everyone knows, it's all okay. Even if the film doesn't work. If your financiers, if it made them laugh, and they know it was a comedy, at least they know that you delivered, the team delivered what you thought was going to be funny. Guess what nobody else did? Oh shit, but we all thought it was funny. We all tried our best. And that's really kind of all you can do as a producer, is to be honest and transparent. But then the other side of that coin, and this is not being dishonest, by the way, the other problem with being a producer is that sometimes you have to be very careful with the truth. Is that you don't need to know. Your designer doesn't need to know, for instance, that 100 extras are stuck on a mountaintop somewhere in 50-foot snow. It's not their problem. It's your problem. And you've got to deal with that problem. And what you don't have to do is tell anyone else. So when the extras turn up an hour late, bedraggled and covered in ice, oh, look, they're all bedraggled and covered in ice. How could that happen? Quickly, defrost them, get them on set. You don't spread the bad news. Bad news is your problem. You're like a sponge. You suck the bad news up and you deal with it calmly, coolly, and if possible, with a sense of humor. And then if you've got to spread the bad news, try and mitigate it so that the bad news isn't quite as bad as it was when you first got it. So you've got an alternative. And that's, again, the working with a writer-director like Neil, is that there's always an alternative to the problem you have. If you've lost a location at the last minute, or you've got a problem with, come up with a solution. Be a problem, solve the fucking problem. And even if it's a really bad idea, at least it's an idea. I mean, I think the words that Neil used with me as a producer more than any other, the two words that he used with me were, fuck off. I would actually write bits of the script because he would frustrate me so much that he wouldn't be able to write the scene. I'd say, Neil, just get that scene written for next week. We've got to shoot it next Tuesday. Yeah. Then he'd walk out. Neil, please. Look, everyone's waiting for it. Look, why don't we just do this? Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay, fine. Can you just do it? Yeah, and walk out. Finally, I'd go, okay, this is what we can do. Here you go, here's that scene. He'd look at it and go, are you fucking mad? Fuck off. No, it should be like this. And then he'd write it. Great, thank you. You have to be, that relationship has to work. You have to be able to be brave enough to defy everyone and everything because you're problem solving. And you have to be able to know where the boundaries of the relationship are. So the intimacy between Neil and I was strong enough that we could be angry with each other, we could scream at each other, we could fight with each other, because we both knew we were on the same team. And it was all okay. Because at the end of the film, I knew it would be fine if we had a good movie, and if it wasn't a good movie, it probably wouldn't be so fine. But the relationship was about the film. The arguing was always about what is the right road to take. So that's something which, as a producer, you have to be able to learn to do, which is to understand the psyche of your teams. There's a psychological thing always going on. Anyway, that was the longest answer to a question you've ever had.
I have about 10 more questions, but
I didn't answer all of them in one go.
you've actually answered all of them in one go, so that made my job a lot easier. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up now, but I think I speak for all of us when I say it's been a really fascinating and hilarious chat. So thank you very much, Stephen.
So thank you for listening.
Stephen Woolley, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to take a short break, grab a drink, have a cigarette, watch out for the rain, and be back here for the program of short films. Thank you.
Oh no, that's cool. I hope it wasn't too rambling.
No, it was terrific. I mean,
Okay, good.
I'll be honest. There are people we've had here who I feel like, I have to cut them off. But like in every moment, I thought, no, I got to hear what's going to happen next, and I really think that's.
Oh, good.
I think
Great.
that's pretty representative of everyone in the room. It was very, very entertaining.
Fantastic.
Fascinating.
Well, it's kind of important to me for people to understand what a producer does.
Yeah.
Because people just don't understand what a producer does.
Yeah.
And of course, the complicated thing is that producers do different things.
Right.
And that's what makes it so complicated, because directors do one thing.